Welcome. Well, you are at home with Jim and Joy, and we're delighted that you have tuned us in today. You know, you are an important part of our EWTN family, and we would love to hear from you. All you need to do is email us at jimandjoy@ewtn.com. Well, sweetie, today we have just another fabulous guest, a dear friend whose name is Kevin Burke, and along with his beautiful wife, Teresa, Kevin is the co-founder of Rachel's Vineyard Ministries. Now, what that does, what is Rachel's Vineyard Ministries? Well, I'm sure you've heard us talk about it before, but it's a beautiful ministry, a post-abortion healing ministry that is in 70 countries all over the world. They do 1,000 retreats all throughout the weekend, and it is just, and the program is in 22 different languages.
Amazing.
So they have done an amazing work healing all the people who have been injured by having an abortion, family members, the shock waves of all that effect and how that has gone out to the whole world, not just the United States, but the whole world.
Kevin's also a pastoral associate with Priests for Life. That's where we got to know the Burkes when I worked there. But Joy, this whole area, and it's a very sensitive area, but it's going to be a beautiful sharing today because there's hope and healing, God's mercy. And Kevin specializes in that whole area of healing the trauma from abortion regarding men in particular. I was thinking back, years back, when I met one of the first men that I had ever met who was experiencing really the trauma of abortion. His girlfriend, the mother of that baby, had come through our center, and our good counselor shared with her and went through all the good things that we share about fetal development and all the resources that we can help, and gave an ultrasound and so on. Every resource you need will be there for you, but this woman made the choice to go ahead with this abortion. So she did. But then she returned, and this time she returned with somebody who wasn't with her before when we first shared with her. That was the father of the baby, the boyfriend. And I'll never forget them sitting on the couch where I was, and she shared her story that, you know, I had been here, you shared beautifully with me, and everything you said was right. Not me, but the people who shared with her at the center. And I had this abortion, and this is the father of the baby. He didn't know. I didn't tell him. And I'll never forget I could still see him sitting on the couch, kind of hunched over like this, his head down, his eyes down, and just everything in his body said, you know, I'm hurting. And then finally he looked up after she shared, and she had such regret over her abortion that she didn't share with him. And he said, I would have done anything. I wanted this baby, but I didn't know. I was just listening, and I was so hurt for him. And anybody who thinks that men do not suffer trauma from abortion doesn't understand, because they do. His guilt, his shame, I mean, I really felt like he was saying, I would have done anything. And I think that kind of protector, defender, provider, all that, and I didn't have opportunity to do anything. She never told me. He didn't even articulate it the way I'm articulating it. He was just very sad and hurting and there. And I don't know all of what I shared because it was some time back, but you know, it really was a better day than the day before when she didn't tell him that what she had done. In other words, truth was there, light was there. It was a very hard day, but at least it was out in the open, so he could begin to express my hurt, my isolation in this, and what my hopes were for this had I been able to be involved. And whatever they would do in the future, whether they would continue together, or if they got married, or if they ended the relationship, or whatever, at least it would be based on truth of what took place. And that's so important in this healing process, to get out of the falsehood, darkness, denial, and that the couple can begin to share about, this has happened, what do we do from here in our relationship? How do we relate to this baby? That is our baby really eternally, so to speak, and how do we move on from here? How do we develop a relationship in this, and what kind of decisions do we want to make into the future?
Yeah, because I think what's important is a lot of people think that the men, first of all, that they don't care and they just impregnated you and now you're on your own, or sometimes some guys say, I'll support you whatever you decide to do,
Right. It's all different.
or they're coercing the girl to have an abortion, but they're still suffering from lost fatherhood.
Yeah, and once they come to terms with, oh, I was coercive, or I just put it all on her, or I really didn't even know. There's all sorts of, so we want you, please stay tuned, especially if you're a guy out there, or you're a wife, or you're in relationship with a guy who is post-abortive, or you yourself have suffered an abortion, pregnancy loss, or you encourage somebody else to do it. There is hope, there is help, there is healing. Kevin Burke, co-founder, Rachel's Vineyard Ministries. Up next, don't go away.
Welcome back. Well, you are at home with Jim and Joy, and you are an important part of our EWTN family, and we would love to hear from you during our show. It's a live show. If you have a question today for our guest, Dr. Kevin Burke, just give us a call during our live broadcast. If you're in North America, call us at 1-800-221-9460. Outside of North America, you can always reach us at area code 205-271-2980. You can always send us an email during our show, Jim and Joy at EWTN.com, and hopefully we can use your question right here on the air. Well, Kevin, welcome to At Home with Jim and Joy. You are a dear friend, you and your beloved wife, Teresa. So tell us a little bit about yourself, you know, the normal part of your life, and then how the two of you got involved in this ministry.
Well, Teresa and I will be married 30 years.
Congratulations.
In August. We have 5 children, aged 30 to 17.
Wow.
And 1 grandchild.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
William.
Beautiful.
Isn't that the best?
That's a great joy.
Yeah.
And I'm a licensed social worker. My concentration and training was in counseling, marriage, family counseling. So that's my background.
Right.
And then how we got into this, when Teresa and I got married, post-abortion healing was not on our personal or professional radar at all. Teresa was in graduate school. I had already had my degree in social work, and Teresa was in graduate school for psychology. We were just starting a family. And she was running an eating disorder group as part of her internship and training. It was supervised by a psychiatrist. It was an eating disorder center. So these women all have anorexia and bulimia. The subject of abortion came up one evening in the group, and it was very volatile. And it turns out that, you know, let's say about 80% of the participants had abortions. You can read about this in Teresa's book, Forbidden Grief.
Right.
And she went to her supervising psychiatrist, said, this was like a bomb going off when this surfaced. I think we need to really talk more about this. And the psychiatrist looked at her and he actually wagged his finger and he said, this is an eating disorder group. I forbid you to address this topic. It has nothing to do with their symptoms. Now, if you know Teresa, you know that at that point,
It's not good to wag a finger in her face.
that was going to be her life's mission and vocation. So it's interesting how here he's trying to shut down healing, but this actually opened a door. The Holy Spirit opened a door in Teresa's heart and mind and led her to then to look at, I know there's other women like this. I want to begin to help them.
So when these women, however it came about, started sharing with each other, they found that they had abortion in common, many of them.
Yes.
And so what was the conversation in that area? What was coming out of their conversation saying, well, this is, you know, what we're not finding out there to help us? Or what was the conversation about?
The conversation, well, it started because there was a phone call from a former partner that she had the abortion with. He obviously didn't support the abortion and was angry and hurt by that. He was dealing with this anger in a very abusive way. He was calling her up and he was calling on the phone and calling her a murderer and doing things to try to hurt her. So you see how destructive this can become. So she shared that, and then there was a lot of anger from those who have had abortions. He has no right to do that, and another participant said, I have a right to do what I want with my body. And of course, her body was out of control with an eating disorder, not associating
Right.
her abortion with perhaps contributing to that. Another participant tried to change the subject, did not want to talk about it, which is our whole culture. Let's not even address this.
Right.
So she was distracting. Look at my sweater, isn't it pretty? Another individual got up and just left, and they heard the car screech in the parking lot. That represents this is such a sensitive and painful area of loss that it's very difficult to even talk about it.
Right.
So you had all these different manifestations of how that wound just leads to very painful and powerful emotions. But what do you do with all that?
Right.
The title of the book, Forbidden Grief.
Forbidden grief.
Was this a part of the conversation among the people, or is this something that just kind of came out? I'm speaking about, did they get that they needed to grieve, or that people don't want to talk about this, or is this what Teresa learned through the process, that grief work is very important to the process, but really nobody wants to hear it, or you don't need to do it?
Well, a very important first step happened that night, a preliminary, very first step, which is just acknowledging that this is
an issue. This is
an
big.
issue. There's some really powerful and painful feelings associated with that. But how do you take that powerful emotional energy and how do you process that? And can you do it in strictly a psychological healing approach? What Teresa found early on as she began to explore this in her counseling is that this is a soul wound. So if you just apply even the best psychology to this wound, that's not going to be enough. You need to have an integrated, and this was Teresa's genius and the Holy Spirit working with her, you need an integrated emotional and spiritual program to bring a deeper healing to this type of wound, because it's a complicated grief. This isn't a normal experience of grief. When we have a normal experience of grief, we can talk to each other about it. We have rituals and exercises we go through, and we have the support of family and friends. With abortion, as you well know from your ministry.
Right. Well, we want you to kind of unpack this unique grief and the inability of so many people to be able to find places where they can articulate this, get in touch with the people who can help them. But I understand that we have a caller, and this is someone that has association with Rachel's Vineyard ministry. And so why don't you tell us more about this call?
Yes, Rob was very kind to share with us today about he was involved in a number of different abortion decisions and procedures. And he also found healing through Rachel's Vineyard. So I'm really very grateful for Rob for calling in and being willing to share with us.
Rob, you're at home with Jim and Joy. We're so blessed to have you with us today. And so just feel free to share with us and our family.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on there today. My story, unfortunately, started about 4 decades ago while I was in college. It was with 3 separate partners. We were using birth control every time, but it failed all 3 times. And together, without pressuring each other, each time we made the unfortunate and irreversible decision to discontinue the pregnancies and seek abortions. When we went to the clinics, the counselors were all pretty much the same. They told us that we would be sad for a short period of time. Unfortunately, in my case, that sadness has lasted decades. During the procedures, I was present with each girl. I went into the room with them, watched everything that was going on. And quite honestly, even today, I'm still haunted by the sights and sounds. When I hear a vacuum cleaner or see clear tubes, it gives me flashbacks back to that time. Shortly after that period of college, I decided that I should do something about this because the pain was just getting too much for me. So I actually decided to have a vasectomy. And it wasn't until many years later, in retrospect and with age, I think my decision to have the vasectomy was basically due to God giving me 3 just incredible gifts. And unfortunately, I literally threw them away. And internally, I felt like I did not deserve another chance. I had been given 3, and that was enough. So for decades, I was just sort of motoring along, dealing with a loss and internal pain. And it actually wasn't until just a few years ago, I happened to be talking to a priest on a completely unrelated topic, and just out of the blue, something I hadn't thought about for decades, I just started to cry uncontrollably, and we quickly got to the root cause, and that was the abortions that I suffered decades ago. Wow. Thankfully, this priest was pretty well versed with Rachel's Vineyard. He sent me towards the website, and I got on there and made the decision to sign up for the retreat. There wasn't one in New Hampshire where I'm located, but there was one in Maine, so I signed up for that. Very scared. I was the only male in the group, but like everybody else that showed up, ages from 18 all the way to more than 70, we were all terrified. But the events that happened in the weekend, you can't describe them in words. It was just absolutely amazing, a healing event. And by the time Sunday came around, no one wanted to leave the building. And I can't, anyone out there, any males that are having the loss or sort of the pain that I've been discussing, I can't recommend you enough to get on rachelsvineyard.org, get a retreat, sign up, commit yourself to going, and let the healing begin. I think that Kevin and Teresa have not only done a good job, they've done an outstanding job of putting this program together. And I've been very blessed by the Maine team, the state of Maine, to be on their chapter, and it's a blessing every time I get to attend.
Rob, thank you so much, and we're so sorry for your losses, but what a loving testimony, what a hopeful testimony, and many lives are going to be touched because of that. What do you hear in Rob's sharing? How is his story classic in any way, or what?
I'm so deeply grateful for him sharing that, because we're just beginning to recognize in our society, just beginning to recognize that women can experience that procedure as a traumatic loss. A lot of people don't think that a man can also experience emotional trauma. But what he articulated very beautifully is that when you're in that procedure room, and I talked to a man the other day who was in the procedure room, and he had the same exact kind of traumatic reaction. They see the contents of their baby and the blood go up into the tube, into the jar. So when he sees medical tubing, when he hears a vacuum, it triggers those memories and very painful feelings. So that it's clearly, that's a textbook definition of psychological trauma reactions, what he described. So in addition to that, if you don't have healing after that trauma, it's very common to repeat themes of that trauma. And again, I learned this from the master, which is Teresa. Teresa really developed this whole idea of traumatic repetition, and you can read about that again in Forbidden Grief. But if you don't heal those themes and those memories, those feelings, that whole event, if you don't go through a healing process from all that powerful emotional energy, you then find yourself repeating those themes again in your life in subsequent relationships. And you find yourself again at the abortion clinic. And each time you feel more and more ashamed, you're more and more traumatized. Sometimes you master the trauma by becoming numb and pretending like it's no big thing. So some women have 3, 5, 12, even 20 abortions. And of course, the abortion industry is very happy to take their money. So that repetition is a powerful part. Now we want to stop abortions before they happen, but if we can get healing of that initial abortion loss, we're going to save many more babies and many more people from acting out on that trauma in their lives.
So, Kevin, one of the things that Rob shared was after he had the 3 abortions that it is the self-mutilation and the self-hate that he then took himself to have a vasectomy. How common is that in men that are post-abortive?
I can't tell you that, the amount of men that do that, but I would say it's a very common theme. You'll see that kind of self-destructive behavior, though, in other ways. They'll sabotage their relationships. They'll throw themselves into work, and at the expense of their relationships with their living children. They'll wonder, they may not recognize the connection to their abortion, so they'll wonder at midlife, I've been working like crazy. I throw myself into my career, and here 20 years later, I'm estranged from my children. My wife hates me. Like, what the heck? And then and then the bottom drops out, and sometimes they're at risk for suicide. And again, they may not connect that to that abortion loss, but it can be a factor in what they're experiencing. So yeah, that's self-destructive. That's with men and women.
Yeah.
There's many creative ways, that, sadly, that men and women find to shame and hurt themselves and to reenact those themes in their relationships.
You know, when I ministered in another Christian tradition as a minister, it was pro-life, very committed, but would not share about it very much from the pulpit because I was afraid of hurting those that may have had an abortion or were involved. So I just felt like, well, if I say that, they're going to get hurt. I understand now that they're hurting already. But what turned the corner for me was a woman who came to me for counseling. And she sat with me and she started talking about how she wanted a hysterectomy. So I said, but the word want a hysterectomy was stressed. I said, well, is there some kind of, precancerous thing there or illness that you're trying to? She said, no, I wanted a hysterectomy. And as we spoke, it came out that she had had an abortion. And I was kind of new to this thing of thinking things through. And I said, are you saying because you had an abortion, you want a hysterectomy? That's what it sounds like you were saying. And she was like, yes, I want a hysterectomy. It was just so, and that's when I understood that we need to address this with our people so that they could find proper healing and not do things like this to think that this is some kind of a remedy or a punishment to themselves. And this is far more prevalent than we can imagine.
Yeah, he clearly knew that this was hurting him. He didn't know how to, like most people, many people listening today, they don't quite know how do I deal with this? How do I find healing? What do I do with all this? And his answer was, at least I'm going to abort my fertility. Right. At least this way I won't find myself in this situation again. But that's not the answer. No. The answer is not. The answer, God has a much more beautiful answer to that problem.
He started off speaking about using contraception.
Yes.
So I don't know how early on he was doing that. And I see more and more, in our center and just speaking with people. I mean, these girls are on birth control, 12 years old, 11 years old, and all the problems with that. And some guys who aren't even active being instructed by their parents, well, here, take this with you and this and that. And so it sounds like this was like a foundational thing, a responsible thing, but it didn't help the situation. Can you speak about contraception, abortion, the relationship?
His parents were clearly, I don't know a lot of information about his parents, but they were clearly children of the sexual revolution. And so they were very permissive in allowing their children to be sexually active, sadly. So that was the message he grew up with. But he also received or had the message himself that, well, I need to do this responsibly. And so he saw contraception as being the responsible way to be sexually active. But we hear this so many times on retreat weekends, and you're familiar with this as well, Jim and Joy. Abortion is clearly used as a backup for contraception failure. And there's such a relationship between getting involved in relationships intimately before you're ready to deal with the consequences and have the maturity and the trust and the communication so that you can, make the right decisions for life. So many people are so immature when they're making the decisions. And of course, the contraception does fail. Both the various kinds in various ways can fail. And it's tragic that he was in that position.
And the mindset is developed. I mean, contraception is against conception. So then we're seeing and hearing people that are saying, I took steps because I was against this. And now they have this kind of odd or wrongful conception. And so it's antagonistic. It's like I was saying beforehand, I was being responsible. I didn't want this, and now this has happened. Therefore, this like justifies in their thinking going ahead and doing this. I was being responsible. This is here. This shouldn't be here. This is a wrongful conception. Therefore, this is what I do. And we see this again and again.
It brings to mind to me, I often have this image when I'm listening to men, when I'm on retreats and I'm listening to the stories. I always think of the original sin. And I think, and unfortunately, I think today, a lot of people look at that as kind of a whimsical myth, a cute little story. But boy,
so what does the original sin have to do with
It's never
this?
been more relevant to today. That apple, not respecting God's providence over our sexuality, over life itself. When we don't respect that providence, when we listen to the serpent, and it opens the door to so much suffering. I think in particular, this is a very important analogy for men. So many abortion decisions, so many stories you hear in a Rachel's Vineyard retreat, and you hear the man's role in that abortion. It echoes in many ways the experience of Adam in the garden. Now, when Eve was facing the serpent, and I have to give Scott Hahn credit for illuminating this for me, he talks about the word snake is not so great an interpretation of that Hebrew word. It's more dragon, like the dragon in Revelation. This diabolical, very intelligent, devious force that Eve is facing. And when Eve faces that, is confronted with that serpent, where's Adam? And of course, he's right there.
Yeah.
But he's silent. And then when the Lord comes down and holds him accountable, he blames her. So in many abortion decisions, and this is a very painful, I don't say this was accusation. I say this because I know this is where men hurt. So many men are like Adam in that situation, and she is facing that very difficult decision, and they may either say, it's your decision, which is often a death sentence for the baby,
right.
And the woman feels like, well, you're not going to be there for me. Or they push and subtly coerce her, or there's outright aggression and violence toward the woman
right.
to abort. And in all those situations, you're pushing the woman and your unborn baby into the hands of the serpent.
Right.
And when men realize it, maybe they're hearing this now and just realizing, that's what I did. Don't despair.
Amen.
That's a real pain, though, because that's attacked a fundamental identity of who we are as men. It attacks us where we should be defending life.
Let's pause right there, and I hope the men out there and women as well are hearing a hopeful message from Kevin Burke, co-founder of Rachel Vineyard Ministries. We're going to take a break. We do want to hear from you. Call in. You can give your name or anonymously. We'll be right back. Please don't go away.
Welcome back. Well, remember, we want you to be a part of our show. If you have a question for today's guest, just give us a call during the live broadcast. If you're in North America, call us at 1-800-221-9460. Outside of North America, you can reach us at area code 205-271-2980. Or send us an email, jimandjoy@ewtn.com, and hopefully we can answer your question right here on the show, and you can get to talk to Kevin. Now, if you don't already have a copy of Mother Angelica's Promises, Mother Angelica's books on answers, not promises, from the EWTN Religious Catalog, Mother Angelica has always been straightforward with all of the solutions of life's puzzling problems. And this book is a great summer read, and you can order it by going to EWTNRC.com or give them a jingle at 1-800-854-6316, and it's item number 80046. Be sure to get a copy of that book.
I do want to underline the invitation from Joy for you to call in today or to send us an email. We're really praying that today would be a great day of healing and of hope for you or for your loved ones. So we are here for you. Kevin, earlier on in our conversation, you're speaking about the need for healing. And Therese is seeing that this is a holistic matter, that we're touched. The wound, it's a wound. Abortion is a wound. It's a soul wound. It's a physical wound. I think it's a sexual wound. In terms of, there's so many dynamics. It affects our minds, our souls, our senses. So how does Rachel's Vineyard address those areas for healing?
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I think that when Teresa saw the nature of that wound, she realized that the healing process had to respond to those different elements. And so her gift, really is a beautiful gift that she has, and the Holy Spirit was very powerfully working with her through this. But her gift was to develop a process that starts on Friday evening and ends on Sunday that very much engages the senses in the healing process. Not only are you talking at times and sharing, But most importantly, there's meditation. You're calming the mind, because when people have experienced very intense emotional pain, whether they experience it as traumatic or a complicated kind of a loss, it's difficult to talk about. It's difficult to access that, because the part of the brain that deals with the emotions, it's firing very powerfully. It's all, you imagine it being bright red. And the part of the brain that wants to kind of understand what happened and reason through that, and the rational part of the brain, it kind of gets turned off. So people, when they start accessing that painful feelings and emotions, they sometimes are shut down. They want to run from it. They want to self-medicate with alcohol and drugs, or through anger. A lot of times men medicate through their anger to deal with this painful feeling. So she developed these scripture-based meditations, beautiful, powerful meditations where you enter in very powerfully into scripture experiences that are very healing, and that they respond to how you're feeling at that point on the retreat. For instance, the woman caught in adultery. So, you know, you go through that experience, because when they come on that retreat initially, they're terrified, as Rob said, you know, men and women.
How do you go through? So they're not only hearing a teaching, which you need on the woman caught in adultery, the power of the scripture, how are they going through that physically in some way?
Well, first they go through that living scripture where they are in the story.
Okay.
So they're the woman caught in adultery, or they're the man perhaps holding the stone, or that's their partner that they had the abortion with, who's facing condemnation and they abandon. So there's various ways you can imagine yourself in that story. After the story is completed, they pass around a stone. And of course, you know, we know what happened. Jesus, you know, freed her and held them accountable to their own sin. And they pass around the stone and they say, you know, does anyone here condemn you? No, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. The priest will say, go and sin no more. And then I pass the rock to the next person. And we establish safety in the group through that exercise. And then they take a rock and they hold on to that rock as long as they need to during that weekend. And the rock represents their anger at themselves and others, their self-hatred, their self-judgment. Because a lot of times people can hear that God forgives them, but they can't their heart is so filled with toxic pain, they can't open their heart to accept God's mercy. Sometimes you need help to open up that way. So that process of the rock, holding the rock, engaging with another person and acknowledging, you know, neither do I condemn you, all that begins to open the heart and the spirit and the body and the brain in such a way that you can begin to embrace the truth, which is the beautiful and powerful mercy. God is just waiting for you to come back. You know, he's not waiting to condemn you. He wants you to come back to his heart.
Because I'm holding that rock anyway. But now I see it, you know.
Yes.
And so then it becomes tangible and it clicks with the senses.
Yes.
And that's just the healing of the senses is just so important to kind of retrain that, or to have a pleasurable experience or a positive experience with that which was negative. I mean, that really must have a chemical effect on the brain itself. And that's where simply discussing abortion and the impact of abortion, which we need to do to get that out rationally, but some things have to be trans-rational. You know, they have to, it has to be beyond the rationale because we've been affected in that way. And so sense things bypass the rational thinking. So that when that guy says, I heard the machine, or I saw this or that, you've seen that goes in. That's just in. You know, and same thing with pornography and garbage. You know, it goes in. You can't like defend yourself. You just kind of see it. So we got to get the good stuff or opportunity for that in there to heal that.
Absolutely.
Or we can't really grasp it because this other emotional stuff is firing off and we feel afraid and want to run or whatever it is.
That's exactly right. Many folks will go to confession multiple times. They don't, because they have, of course, God's mercy and the efficacy of the sacrament is there. But the heart is so filled still with so many painful and conflicting feelings, and they really haven't fully opened their heart to their child. That's the key to abortion healing, is being able to acknowledge the loss, acknowledge everything that happened around that loss, express those toxic and painful feelings. And the process beautifully does that. But the process builds to the point where you then are acknowledging the humanity of this child. This is a particular son or daughter, and it's oftentimes multiple losses. Acknowledging and honoring that child's life, naming that child. And of course, as the humanity of the child becomes more real, the grief becomes more healing. So much of the grief and symptoms of the grief before you find healing are toxic. They're self-destructive. They're senseless. They're not connected to the loss. You know?
Right.
But when you make that connection,
Right.
and you acknowledge that child's life, and your heart is being opened, and it's a safe place, then love can begin to you can begin to love that child.
The other
and
thing
that's key that's for men and women.
Oh, yeah.
So you got all this stuff going on internally, and then maybe you're acting out in different ways, and you're not making the connection with the event that's causing so much of this. That's like insanity. Because
Exactly.
insanity is not being in touch with really what's going on. And so you're not connected, and it's
It
so you
feels
say we've
crazy.
it feels crazy.
It is,
and
it
you don't
is
know why,
crazy.
and it just keeps
Yeah.
going on and on.
And really, you know, we found with so many post-abortive women that, you know, when they go to confession multiple times and, you know, and they may have heard, you know, God forgives you and everything, they really get stuck in a place and in a zone where they just cannot forgive themselves. Because if they have to come to terms with, oh my God, this is what I've done, you know, so it's not just in the confession. That's great and wonderful, but that's just the starting place. Then that's the place then where you need to go, where you could walk through that journey of that process of that healing, forgive and let go of all the people that were involved in that process, but ultimately it's yourself.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Right.
of, I don't know, there's numerous women in the scriptures, but there's that one who evidently was forgiven by Jesus or was going to be forgiven. And I mean, you know, these women are letting down their hair, they're crying. Not that you have to do all that in order to get forgiveness, because you're forgiven through the sacrament of confession. What I'm saying is Jesus allowed these physical things and these sense things, represented even in the hair, true femininity or oil or whatever. It was a whole sense
Smells.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's just so important. Joe, we have an email.
Okay, we're going to go straight to an email. It says, early in our marriage, I became pregnant, but my husband and I decided we weren't ready for children, and I had an abortion. Over the years, this has been stressful to our marriage. We both realized abortion was wrong. I went through a Rachel's Vineyard retreat, but my husband refused to go. How can I convince him that this is something that would help him deal with the pain and the guilt that he is experiencing? And this is Joyce from Oklahoma
Thanks,
City.
Joyce.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And it's a very, very important issue and not uncommon, sadly. I think the first thing I would recommend is take all the pain and grief that you have in your heart for your husband, all that you long for him to experience, that you have experienced, and bring that to each Mass that you go to. And when the sacrifice of the Mass is offer up that as a sacrifice, that pain, that longing, offer it up to the Lord, have Him purify that sacrifice, and that'll purify your heart and your intentions, and it'll bring tremendous grace upon that situation.
Yes.
That's the first step. And I can't say how important that is. And be ready to do that for a while. And this is hard because you want this so much for your beloved spouse, but you need to be patient and wait on the Lord's timing. Okay. The second thing would be to do everything you can gently, that He allows, to level of trust that you have together, and just open up share with him what that experience was like, not with the intention of forcing him or manipulating him to go, not that you would do that, but just make sure that, again, your heart is pure, and just tell him how that experience, what that was like for you. And here's the last important piece. A lot of men would be moved by this. If you can say to him, I know this is something that you don't think you need to do for yourself. Would you do this for me? This is, I know that you understand how this has hurt me, but this is something that would be so meaningful to me, that I would appreciate so much. I know it's difficult for you to step aside and deal with how this hurt you in your life, but if you could do this out of your love for me, and I will journey with you, or she could either journey with him through the retreat weekend and go through the exercises with him and support him through that, or she could come at the memorial service on Sunday and honor that child again with him. So there's just a few ideas of things that they could do.
Beautiful.
Which is so beautiful.
We're speaking with Kevin Burke from Rachel's Vineyard Retreat Ministry. This is a day of salvation. This is a day of hope this is a day of being healed and being forgiven, because those who are forgiven much love much. God not only wants to heal us, but wants to use you as a great spokesperson on behalf of the gospel of life. Mm-hmm. We hope to hear from you. We'll be right back. Please don't go away.
Welcome back. Well, you're an important part of our EWTN family. And you know, you can join us live right here on At Home. You could be in our audience. All you need to do is contact the EWTN Pilgrimage Department, or you do that by emailing pilgrimages@ewtn.com, or just give them a call at 205-271-2966. You can meet us. You can meet our great guests. You could have met Kevin here. We had people that come, literally starting to come from all over the world. It's pretty amazing. So come. We would love to have you here on EWTN campus.
Well, Kevin, let's continue this holy and so important a conversation. I want to get more focused on men, the impact of abortion, any uniqueness with men, or maybe it's not literal abortion. Maybe there are other ways where men feel abandoned or aborted, father-son relationships. You know, what are you learning? What are you seeing in this area of abortion? Other areas, what's the impact on our culture, society? What are you seeing?
Yeah, boy. That's
You want a few more questions in there?
How long do we know? Well, if we look at that, this is a wound to men as fathers. Right. You know, once that child's conceived, there's a relationship there, whether you're conscious of it or not. And when you reject that child, that's a wound to a man's identity. When he has that role, like Adam in the garden in an abortion, then he's attacked in a very deep and fundamental place as a man, defender and protector of life. So how does that manifest itself in his life after that if he doesn't deal with it? Well, you know, there could be issues of powerlessness in his relationships, difficulty making decisions. A huge symptom I see in men, because we don't like to feel vulnerable emotions, we like to feel in control. Being in control is fine, because it's part of being a man, part of being a leader. But sometimes that control is more based on not wanting to feel vulnerable, painful feelings. Right. And so sometimes being angry feels more in control than feeling sad or depressed. Right. Depressed feels vulnerable and feminine. So oftentimes men after abortion, you might recognize a symptom of anger. You know, you blow up because a towel was left on the floor. I mean, really blow up. You have issues with your spouse where you really get into nasty kind of arguments. Maybe there's even physical stuff going on. Right. Maybe at work, you know, you're not advancing as much as you like to because you have anger issues. That would be some of the issues. Perhaps you have trouble bonding with your living children. Maybe you saw the ultrasound for the first time after your abortion or abortions, and you saw the ultrasound of your living child, and you started feeling, you know, painful feelings. Well, those feelings, if they're not resolved, they come into the relationship with your spouse or your partner, and they come into the relationship with your living children. It can lead to distance, it can lead to acting out. High-risk behaviors we see in some men who have experienced particularly traumatic abortions. How do they deal with those painful feelings? They were powerless. They learned about the abortion later, as you shared in the beginning. Maybe they're driving too fast, they're drinking, and they're gambling, pornography. We have to make sure we get to that, the pornography connection. The abortion wound is a wound of that takes place in the context of sexual intimacy, whether it's a one-night stand or a long-term partnership or a marriage. So you have this very conflicting, toxic shame and complicated loss that takes place. You're attacked at a fundamental place as a man. You feel shame and guilt. You're not dealing with those painful feelings. You have grief. So you act out. You try to relieve your pain. You try to increase your good feelings in your brain by engaging in pornographic images. You need more and more disturbing pornography to give you the same kind of experience.
This is chemical as well.
It's chemical, and you feel ashamed. After every episode of delving into that pornography, you're acting out those unresolved grief issues, maybe from other issues in your life, And that gets acted out through the pornography, but in a very toxic way, just like repeat abortions. And you go deeper and deeper. One of the things that can help you pull out of that is do the grief work. Go through a weekend healing program for that abortion loss. Also, you need to deal with that the pornography issues as well. But that can be a very important component of a man's recovery from being involved in pornography.
And this sin could be so generational. Right? I mean, your father or your grandfather could have, gotten a girl pregnant. And so then you're the product and this just goes on and on until God, in his mercy and grace, he's always trying to intervene and cry out. But Rachel's Vineyard is here where people can get help for grandparents or for fathers who maybe have taken their daughter because she was 15 and she got pregnant and the father took her or the grandfather. But then how that... it just wounds all the other relationship because no one's coming from a pure and holy place. They're coming from contaminated and toxic waters. Well,
you'll have all kinds of volatile stuff going on at family gatherings, and you'll have distractions, and people will be drinking too much, and it's the elephant in the room. A lot of times is that daughter who's the grandfather or grandmother, either couldn't stop the abortion or told her this is a grandfather thinking, I want to save her from a life of single parenting, and he thinks he's doing the best thing for his daughter. And he says, you either get an abortion or get out of my house. And then afterwards, the daughter's suffering and hurting, and she can't go to her parents and tell them she's hurting. And he sees she's hurting. He doesn't know what to do with his feelings. Maybe a man listening right now realizes he had that role. Rachel's Vineyard is also for grandparents. You are absolutely welcome. Anyone who's been closely associated with the death of an unborn child, you are welcome to contact Rachel's Vineyard in your area.
We were talking about this earlier, and the grandparent situation, there's such grief within us if we've had a loved one, a son, a daughter, someone who's had an abortion. It's a loss for us. But also, a number of us have been involved in assisting or helping or paying for. And that's a tremendous guilt too. There's hope, there's help, there's healing. The enemy wants to totally isolate you and beat you up in this. But there are people you can go to at rachelsvineyard.org and email us and get the help that you need. Joy, let's take this email.
Okay, it says, I was pregnant at 15 and my parents forced me to have an abortion. My relationship was never the same. I'm in my 40s now and I still have a lot of bitterness. My father has reached out to me several times the past few years, but how do I get over the resentment? And this is from Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. First of all, just honor that resentment in a sense. You don't want to stay there. But that resentment is a natural response to what happened to you. I would strongly encourage you to please consider going on a Rachel's Vineyard retreat. Going through that healing process, unpacking and being able to share with others about that loss, the spiritual and emotional healing you'll experience through that will give you the grace to be able to reach out with God's will and vision for how he will want to heal your family. And I assure you, you take that step, and I know it's scary, if you take that step, and you go through that healing process, the Lord will bring abundant grace to the situation. It will guide you and will bring healing to your family.
Kevin, we've got 3 minutes left, and I've been following your ministry, and you seem to be going to prison a lot. What's going on with your prison work?
Absolutely. Rachel's Vineyard is in Florida, Diocese of Palm Beach. Donna Gardner has a beautiful ministry there, outreach. She goes into the prisons. What we're finding in the prisons, this is very important, is these men, and I've talked to a number of them I had a chance to visit, they've experienced profound father wounds, neglect, abuse, abandonment. Almost all of them have had serious father wounds. When they then participate in an abortion decision, they become they identify both as victim and perpetrator because they have experienced an emotional abortion, in a sense. They were emotionally aborted by their father. And that's a profound wound. And then they become perpetrator and participate in the death of their child. Now, they don't understand this till the other side of healing, but emotionally, this is explosive. And it's part of what leads them into violence and acting out behavior that gets them into prison. It's not the only issue, but what they find in their healing is that it was a powerful spark that took place in their life because it connects to that father wound. The beautiful thing is, this is from the men, they meet God the Father who loves them as a father. That's the first part of their retreat journey in prison. And that's profound for them. And then they heal that relationship with their unborn child. We see that healing then in the relationships with their living children. They're restored as men. One of the men said to me, the Lord is an African-American man, maybe in his 50s. He said, the Lord reached into my chest. He took out my heart and he gave me a new heart. And I was like, wow.
It's biblical.
Yes. So that's a beautiful healing. And think of the application in our area, in our communities where there's so much father loss and father abandonment, and men are struggling and drawn to violence. Abortion healing can be such a vehicle of healing in those communities.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, this has been a profound time, and we're so very, very grateful for your presence with us. And we do have to have you back on because you just begun to unpack it, and you've given to us a real way of healing and of hope with Rachel's Vineyard. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so. I'm so grateful.
God bless you.
We pray that you've been greatly encouraged today. God has a wonderful plan for you. Know that He's not put off by what's taken place in your life, that He's attracted to your weaknesses. So God bless you, and God bless all of your loved ones. Bye now.